Hello, everybody. Welcome to Webinar Wednesday. My name is Martin Lovers. I'm the Chief Trend Watcher of Supply Chain Media. You might also know me as the Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Movement, the quarterly magazine and the website. And I'm also the architect of the IT submap with all the lines about supply chain software. We might discuss this later on in this webinar. Today, we're going to discuss how to deploy a digital supply chain network for accelerated value. And we are doing this with OneNetwork. Okay, you see me here on the left-hand side. That's me. And on the right-hand side, you see Shirell James. Shirell, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Martin.
All right, just a few, notes. This webinar will be recorded and it will be available within 48 hours. Also, the PDF will be made available through our website, so you can pay attention to what we are discussing. So everybody is on mute, but the audience has the availability to ask questions, and there are a few options. You can ask your question by chat, and everybody can see it and answer it. So that's fine. So the first question would be, is this webinar recorded? Yes, it is. But there's also a Q&A. So please ask your questions to Shirell and myself at the Q&A functionality. And if these questions are in line of the discussion we're having, I will pick it up and ask this question right away. If not, we have also a Q&A at the end. And we can ask this question over there. And also, we will have an after talk 30 minutes after the ending of this webinar. So at 5 o'clock CET or 4 o'clock London time, we have 30 minutes, and Shirell and myself will be joining over there. And basically, you can sit at the table with me, but also with other participants in this webinar, and you can have a discussion with us, or ask questions, or you can have a discussion with other people attending this webinar. All right, so basically, this is it. You can also enlarge your screen with the small arrows in the upper right corner of your slide deck you see, so you can enlarge the screen. Okay, let's talk about the real topic of this afternoon. So we have done a survey last year among 106 manufacturing and retail companies in Europe, and it was right after the first wave of the pandemic, and we asked them what would be the investment in supply chain software in the next 12 months. And as you can see, S&OP is number one, but next is end-to-end supply chain visibility, and that's what we're going to discuss. And we made a distinction between the leading company in orange, so they have a number 4 or 5 supply chain maturity on a 0 to 5 scale according to Gartner, and the blue ones, the blue bars, are the overall respondents. So end-to-end supply chain visibility is very hot, and even more hot among leading companies, and also supply chain network is very hot. Shirell, could you comment? So is it surprising to you? Do you also see the same?
No, I don't think it's a surprise. I mean, the last 18 months, there's been a lot of disruption, and I think it's really brought to the forefront how important it is to see the end-to-end supply chain. So understanding everything that's happening, demand, supply, logistics. So yeah, not a surprise at all to see end-to-end supply chain visibility so high up in that chart.
And supply chain network, it used to be software to optimize your locations, your factories, and your warehouses. That has been changed. You also have some sort of a solution in that area, or not?
Yeah. So one of the things that we're seeing happening now is that companies want to look at how they can make changes to the supply chain design, not from necessarily a physical perspective, but where do I source from? So lots of companies have been single source, which is causing some of the problems in particularly automotive industry. But what are my sourcing options? Should I be single source? Should I be multi-source? Based on what's happening today, rather than based on data that might be. I mean, in the past, companies run this maybe 6 months or once a year, maybe even less frequently, but doing that in more real time. So based on the things that are happening in supply chain. What should I do about my sourcing? What should I be doing with my logistics? What should my lead times be? And also, how should I be holding inventory? So as demand variability changes or supply variability changes, or even lead time variability, this is a really interesting one. I think we always talk about demand and supply variability, but I think with all of the disruption in logistics, lead time variability is becoming a big problem. So based on what's happening now, what should my inventory policies be to protect against that? So maybe I need to hold more inventory if there are big lead time variabilities, for example. So yes, I think the move there is away from what is a fairly static supply chain network design process into something that's dynamic and using real-time data.
Yeah. Another thing is the real-time transport visibility is also a software category that's very hot, and there are basically a few competitors, or not competitors, suppliers like Shipio, 4Kite, 6Fold, but they are more in the transportation area, delivering dynamic ETAs. So when do you expect the stuff to arrive? So it's a bit different area than your area you're in, or not?
Yeah, it crosses over. So everything's connected, logistics, production, demand, supply, it's all connected. It's all part of the end-to-end supply chain, and logistics is one piece of that. But we often get into conversations about transportation visibility, and what we try and encourage companies to think about it is it's not just transportation, it's inventory. It's your working capital. It just happens to be moving on the water or in the air or on the road. And to think of that more as a moving warehouse that you can use to be balancing your inventory across the end-to-end network. So it is a piece of it. So logistics is part of what we do. It's an important part of the end-to-end process, but I think it shouldn't be looked at as standalone, because you need to really connect it to inventory for it to become valuable.
Maybe you could tell us something about OneNetwork and what kind of customers you have, and then we go later on into the disruptions and the real digital network. Okay, yeah. So just so about OneNetwork. So we run a federated network of supply chains for industries. So what that means is rather than running a more hub and spoke model, which is what a lot of what you would have seen in the past. So ERPs with connectors to external parties or hub and spoke networks. We run true multi-party networks. And think of it more like a social graph in social media. We call it the enterprise social graph. So everyone joins the same network. There's obviously a permissions model that protects data and it determines who sees what when they see it. But the goal of these networks is to solve a particular industry challenge. So if you look at automotive and retail consumer goods, for example, the challenges they face are very different. So these networks are set up to solve the challenges for that network. So they have the capabilities already enabled on that network. They have the supply chain trading partners already on that network. So in automotive, that would be OEMs, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, logistics providers. In retail consumer goods, that would be retailers, consumer goods, packaging, logistics providers. So it contains all the participants. So when companies join OneNetwork, instead of starting an implementation, which would be a new hub and spoke implementation, it is joining a network. So and the important thing there is, again, coming back to the fact that each one of these is solving a particular challenge for that industry. Yeah, and in the middle, that's not a typo like a SWOT analysis. That's a single version of the truth.
Yes, no, that's a really great point. So single version of the truth. So even though we run industry networks, they are federated. Good examples of that are logistics. So quite often logistics providers, they operate across multiple industries. And also things like in healthcare and life sciences. So in our healthcare network, we have hospitals. Hospitals are receiving products from CPG companies because they have food in the hospital. So there is there are things that happen between those networks, so that we genuinely have a single version of the truth in terms of the companies that are on the network as well as the data.
Yeah. We'll get to it later on, how that works, A bit more about your solution.
Yeah, so like I said, it's a network. We call it the digital supply chain network. So it's connecting all the network participants together wherever they sit within the supply chain. And there are a variety of things that we're doing. So you see from the top there, so eliminate system lead time. So this is something that we've talked about for a long time now. So we believe that really the best way to eliminate the bullwhip effect is to get rid of system lead time. So if you can make data available to all the people who need to see it in the format that they need to see it in real time, then you're going to dampen that bullwhip effect. And that bullwhip effect is what causes risk in the supply chain. Mm-hmm. We provide real-time visibility of demand, supply, production, and logistics. So I think this is very important. There's no point in looking at one of them because they're all interconnected. We enable collaboration and execution to improve the supply chain network. So you can collaborate with all your external partners on the network. You can do execution. So this could be problem solving, for example. So if I have a particular issue, I want to collaborate and execute with my partners. The important thing here is supply chain network. So we really believe it's not about improving your own enterprise only. Obviously, that's important. But if you just focus on your own enterprise, you're going to push the problem upstream, downstream. So how do you solve problems for the network? We use AI for predictive and prescriptive analytics. I think everyone will know what that is. Everyone's talking about predictive and prescriptive analytics. And then we do the network-based optimization. So this is what you were talking about in the previous slide with the supply chain network design. So the network-based optimization is going to look at things of what's the best sourcing policies, who should I source from, lead times, what's my optimal inventory policies or inventory settings across the network. So we do the network-based optimization. And then the bottom one is, and this one is always an interesting one. So the topic of OTIF. So whenever we talk to people about OTIF, is moving that into a conversation more about inventory. So what you really want to be doing is balancing your demand and supply across your network to maximize revenue at lowest cost with the optimal inventory. So rather than focus on an OTIF target, because you kind of OTIF target is to an order that might not be accurate, is to focus on balancing demand and supply.
Very right, so because personally I hate OTIF because OTIF is a very bad KPI. It's a bogus KPI. Why? It's it's two KPIs in one. You have on time, and that's about reliability, and in full, implying that it's lowest cost. So these are it's totally useless to have one KPI combined as OTIF in two. That's stupid. Anyway, so I can have a separate discussion about that. I was wondering, if I look at the schema, if you are joining your network, how do you know that your tier 1, tier 2 is also in the network? Because if you are the only one in your own ecosystem, it doesn't help that much.
Yeah, so we do a vetting process for anyone that joins the network to see how the density of the partner network that's already on the network. Mm-hmm. And then every project that we have, we are onboarding partners. I mean, it's part of everything that we do. So there's always going to be a delta. So there'll always be partners to onboard. So we have an onboarding process for that. So we bring them onto the network.
But it's also quite easy for your partners to join if you are a major OEM manufacturer to invite other suppliers or partners.
Yes, I mean there's always a process that you need to go through.
Of course.
Briefing them why do we want to do this? What's the benefit to them? When you have conversations with the partners about things like costs of goods sold, so instead of saying you need to join this network to benefit me, you need to join this network to benefit us. And how it's going to benefit us is in a cost of goods sold reduction for both, which ultimately helps both companies.
We'll talk about it later, I'm not sure about it. Now talk about the world. I think that the world is in turmoil. There are a lot of disruptions. Disruptions might be the new normal. So can you tell me something about the UK perspective, about examples of the UK disruptions?
Yeah, no, this is really interesting. So whenever I do a webinar at the moment, because disruptions is such a big topic, I always go and look at what's the latest disruptions. And I went and did my research, and it was really surprising. Well, you see in the press what's happening with the UK, but when you start to look into the effect that is having on the UK economy right now, it kind of shifts the whole discussion away from it's a supply chain to it's a company being affected to it's an economy being affected. So a lot of things happening right now. So you'll see in the UK where the retailers are literally having to make decisions about what product they put on the shelf, and they're prioritizing it based on margin. So they'll look at what's the highest margin products, and that's the ones that I'm going to put on the shelf. So ultimately they're losing sales. Mm-hmm. The CPG is losing sales because the product's not getting to the consumer. And that's happening across the board in the UK right now. And that example there, Whole Foods. So Whole Foods is the largest cycling retailer, and they're saying their profits are down 23% compared to the same time last year. And that is purely because of imports. So they're not able to import what they need, and they're not able to get it to the shelf. And so their sales are down. And so then the knock-on effect of that, so you can see Britain's economy came close to stalling in July as disruption from shortages of workers and materials dragged down growth. So I really think that these issues are no longer, there's just been such a rapid shift of conversation from the enterprise mm-hmm. to my ecosystem to the industry, and here we are talking about economies.
Yeah. All right, and if you look at into supply chain, there's also a domino effect of disruptions, isn't it?
Yes, the coffee supply chain example it was a really interesting one to look at. So this is just a coffee supply chain, and if you look at this, is all the steps in the coffee supply chain, and at every single step along this way, something has gone wrong. So from the weather impacting the harvest in Brazil, then global freight disruption, so the Suez Canal problem, pushing up freight costs, the global price of coffee going up because demand went up, but then they have the supply issues, the cup manufacturing. And this one was really not funny, but interesting. So two things impacted the production of cups in the UK. One was Brexit, and mm-hmm. they couldn't import the cardboard, but also the increase of demand for cardboard for online shopping. So they couldn't get what they needed to make the cups. Drivers not available. Then there are production problems, so not getting the materials they need into the factories to be able to do the production. There was also a dairy shortage, so shortage of dairy milk, but also of, you can see the example of the plant-based milk at Starbucks, and then the barista shortage. So everywhere along that supply chain, there were problems. So that meant that Costa Coffee were running out of coffee. They were not able to sell coffee. So this is a similar example to Whole Foods. They're losing money. And everywhere along this chain, people are losing money. They're either losing it in terms of revenue or they're losing it in terms of margin that they're making.
So in the end, we are talking about the vulnerability of businesses and also mm-hmm. of supply chain, of different businesses in supply chain.
Yeah, it's everyone. And this is some stats from material handling and logistics. And when they talk about 70% of Fortune 1000 companies outsource at least one or more core functions of their supply chain. So if you extrapolate that coffee example to all of these companies, the global impact is huge. It's, revenue, cost, inventory, margins. So, there needs to be a change in the way companies are approaching their supply chains going forward to enable them to kind of manage this risk that's in their supply chain.
I was watching a keynote presentation of an online gardening event earlier today. And it was an author, Peter Hinson, talking about, he's an author of a book, and he talked about we're getting into the never normal. So it's not the new normal, but the never normal. It will change, indefinitely from now on. And supply chain will be at the heart of it, to design it, to make sure of it, and to prepare companies for that. Talk about the complexity of supply chain. So what is the old status of supply chain?
Yes. So this is just kind of when you take a look at how supply chains have evolved. So if you go back in time and you look at how manufacturers worked 20, 30 years ago, they did a lot of things themselves. And then gradually over time, things start to get outsourced, and supply chains have become more and more complex. Mm-hmm. And the more relationships and interdependencies there are in the supply chain, the more risk there is, the less resilient it is, the less agile it is. And I think, up until, and COVID seems to have been the trigger for it, but up until that time, you had to try and handle demand variability and supply variability, but it was okay. And so it was manageable. And I think now we've seen a big shift where it's no longer manageable, and the risk to business is very high. Supply chains have a direct impact on P&L. So if you're not managing your supply chain effectively, you're putting the business at risk. So I think the risk is high. And the whole, it's almost like the whole approach to it needs to shift. It needs to change, because if you just maybe go to the next slide.
Okay.
So if you think about the way that supply chains have been set up, again, going back 30 years, everyone kind of did, you do your own manufacturing. There wasn't a huge amount of variability. Consumers weren't very fussy. So all these things that are affecting supply chains today weren't there. And nothing has changed really from a technology perspective. Companies try to band-aid the problem by putting in collaboration tools or putting in visibility tools. But really, this is where the end-to-end comes in, because it's not just me to my next tier, it's me to my next tier, to the next tier, to the next tier.
Yeah.
So there is such an interdependency between all those tiers. So that's the first thing, getting out of that silo approach and truly getting out of it, not getting out of it half-heartedly, but really getting out of the silo. The second thing is, and I think this is a really interesting statistic, 80% of the data needed to effectively run a global supply chain resides with partners.
Yeah.
So how do you get access to that data? So we see a lot of companies going on a journey with the data lake. So I'm going to make a data lake and I'm going to get visibility. But it's really important when you do that to think about, how do I get my external data as well? Because the external data is where the disruption is.
One thing, and maybe, you hinted on it a bit, companies try to extend their ERP, and maybe they created their own version, but still, it's called ERP. It's standing for Enterprise Resource Planning, but it's not planning at all. It's just an order administration environment. And if you build on it, you probably lost. But now, okay, with a data layer, the good thing about the data layer is, in the old days, you have to tap in your ERP system with an API, your TMS, your WMS, and so forth, your APS. But the good thing about a data layer is, okay, you are able to tap in this data layer more easily than to bolt on hard-copied, hardcore APIs on your ERP, TMS, etc., etc. So that's the good thing of a data layer. But it's making the world more adaptable to your needs outside, but still you need to have this connection to the outside world.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's really important to get that external input.
Yeah, let's talk about the digital supply chain network. As you know, everybody's talking about digital supply chain, but what is a digital supply chain network?
Yeah, so digital supply chain network. So, and this flows on very nicely from that ERP discussion. So it's kind of a progression. So what we saw maybe 10, 15 years ago was trying to extend ERP. So getting my external connections to my next tier or into logistics, and sort of kind of doing a extended enterprise. Then there are hub and spoke models. So these are where it's kind of connecting all these different, I've got my hub and I can go down to my next tier of supply and I can get some basic logistics visibility, and then connecting them together. So if you have a very complex supply chain like automotive, you have to create a lot of these hub and spoke models along the way. And obviously you're losing that real-time visibility because you're still hopping between hubs. You've got lead times in there, you've got latency, you've got replication of data. So there's still a lot of issues with this hub and spoke model. So the digital supply chain network is a true many-to-many model. So this is what I was touching on earlier. So the enterprise social graph. So it represents the end-to-end value chain, and then capturing the data from each of those nodes into a single version of the truth network model. So it's kind of, first of all, giving visibility to the data in the network. And then it's using that predictive and prescriptive analytics to identify when things are not executing as they should do. And then you can start to layer on things like replanning the supply chain, so if there are issues, and then the optimization. But it really is, it's very different. So this is, what I wanted to make the point of here is there are different ways of looking at it. So one is a, ERP hub model, then you have the hub to hub models, but a digital supply chain network is a many to many network.
Okay. When I talk to the left side, if you have your ERP environments, say SAP or Oracle, but SAP bought Ariba and they created procurement platforms, but it's still, more in the middle. It's a bespoke network model. It's not about supply chain and managing supply chains. It's just like procurement, and you have your notes where to buy, but it's not so much as you have an oversight of your whole supply chain end to end.
Yeah. So if you think about automotive right now, so if you're an OEM and you have a connection to your tier one suppliers, it doesn't help you with the chip shortages.
No.
Because that chip shortage is much further down.
Yeah.
This is upstream. So so that's where an hub and spoke model will fall down.
Yeah, and now what Laura Cicera from Supply Chain Insight, a well-known analyst in the US, probably the best one in the world, in my opinion. She's talking about the network of networks. So we have to get rid of, you have EDI and that kind of stuff, but to get it beyond that, you have your network, and there might be some other network. Basically, you have a network of networks, and that's what you are building, and you already have different kind of flavors of network in food and automotive.
Yeah.
So that's also beyond that. The point is, I mentioned earlier, how to start.
Okay. Yeah. So this is quite often what comes up when we do these presentations. So we'll do a presentation, and the response will be, it sounds too hard. It sounds too expensive. It sounds like it will take too long. I've done an ERP project and it's taken me this, several years and cost me billions, millions. I just don't even know how I could even think about this. So we recommend a step-by-step approach. First thing is we already have the network. So that is a key point. The networks already exist. So it's not starting from ground zero. It's not starting from the beginning. The network is there.
So how long are you operating this network? So when did the OneNetwork start to build?
Well, we were founded in 2002, and I guess the networks over time have evolved. So the first one would have been retail consumer goods. So we've had that one probably since 2003. Along with the global logistics one, then automotive probably since 2007, 2008. And then since then, the life sciences one kind of probably 7-8 years ago.
So how many companies are in the CPG environment, or overall, in the ball figure, what?
I don't know how many I don't know the breakdown by enterprise type, but overall we've got 90,000 companies on the network, and that's hubs and spokes, and logistics providers. So there's 90,000 companies, maybe even more than that now. But the last stat was 90,000 collaborating on OneNetwork.
But you have the main one, the OEMs one, well, your real customers, plus the other one, their partners providing data for the OEMs to make sense of it all.
Right. So you have OEMs, tier ones, tier twos, into the tier ones, and logistics.
So you started with the visibility part. So explain a bit further. So how do you start this foundation?
Yeah, so what we always recommend is you start with visibility. So you build this foundation. Quite often companies don't know really what's causing the problem. They know they have issues. So there's a metric in the supply chain that is not as it should be, or in the case of automotive and high tech, they definitely know what the problem is. But start by getting visibility so that you understand what is happening, what's happening in my internal and external supply chain, eliminating those system lead times so you get that real-time visibility of what's going on. So if a supplier is short shipping, or a container is stuck on the water, or my demand is going up. So getting that visibility of what's changing and what the impact of that is on your supply chain. So if my container is late on the water, it means my inventory is going to stock out and I'm not going to be able to meet the demand, and I'm going to lose revenue of X. So that's, the type of information that you'll start to get from visibility. So really understanding the root cause and the impact. Then from there, once you know that, you can start to look at what are the things that I need to do to then fix those problems. So if I have a supply problem, so I continually have a supply problem, we can put in supplier collaboration. If I continually have a demand issue, we can put in autonomous forecast management. If I continually have a short supply in my warehouses, we can do things around last minute allocation, demand translation, capacity planning with suppliers. So we can start to put this planning and execution layer on top to solve the particular problems that are uncovered from the visibility layer, the foundation. And then the third step is then the optimization. So this is where you can start to do things like, what's my sourcing policies, what's my lead times, what are my inventory policies, but that's based on real-time data now. So I've got all this data that I've built up in the network. So now I can start to optimize across the network, not just in my silo, but I'm going to start optimizing for the network.
Well, I see that there is a mentioned integrated business planning. That's the the more advanced version of SNOP with the financial connotation.
Yes,
but you have a different kind of approach than the traditional SNOP software vendors, starting with forecasting, demand planning, supply planning, and so on.
Yeah, so we take a very, So SNOP, again, I always think it's a very siloed solution. So it's normally gathering data and then you're running a weekly SNOP process, monthly SNOP process. Whereas what we do is we look at it more in real time. So it was a roll up. So it's rolling everything up from execution into planning and then into the optimization. So yes, you're going to be setting your revenue targets on a however often, and then reviewing those revenue targets. But you can just then be a bit more dynamic in your planning, and also doing it with your partners. So rather than you just sitting and doing an SNOP process on your own, you can start to do integrated business planning. You could do it with your key manufacturers, for example, if you're using contract manufacturers.
Let's talk about lead time and lead time of data, because next to the lead time of goods, I think the lead time of data is essential. So we talk about the real-time environment. Can you explain it a bit? What do you mean by real-time data and how to respond to that?
Yeah, so if you think about how a supply chain typically works today, data hops between the different tiers. So retailer will share data, store to DC, then that will go to the CPG DC, and that will then go to the manufacturer, the production. And there's a lag. So there's a data lag. So it takes a long time from what's happening at the store to get to the supplier, and everyone knows that. That's the bullwhip effect, and that's what everyone buffers against with safety stock. I guess the ultimate goal is to eliminate all of that. What you want to be able to do is, as soon as something is happening at the store, is for that to be translated in real time to supply. Now, obviously, it's a journey to get there. It's not something that would happen day one if you're joining OneNetwork, because you need to connect all that network together. But really, elimination of lead times. We have this inventory simulator. It's really interesting. And in the inventory simulator, which we did with the University of Texas, you model your supply chain. So you say, this is my supply chain. These are my physical lead times, which I can't change. These are my system lead times. This is my forecast accuracy. This is my supply variability. This is my lead variability. And you can then start to play with those numbers. So you can do things like, if I increase my forecast accuracy, what does that do to inventory? And the thing that really changes it is lead times. You take the lead time away.
Yeah, but I was wondering, okay, the automotive industry is in turmoil. There's a lack of chips and other parts. But basically, they have triggered themselves because they canceled orders for chips, a year ago around the summertime. Again, you're running a supply chain network in automotive. Didn't have a clue that what they were doing. They were just creating bullwhips and disturbing the whole. And only Hyundai was the only, and Toyota were the only automotive OEM manufacturers building up supplies a year ago in the fall of last year, and the rest didn't. So they keep on doing just in time. But weren't you able to advise the automotive industry with your network, or is it up to themselves to act upon it?
Yeah, so our automotive customers will say that the network is what enabled them to get through the last 12 months.
Okay.
So it enabled them to see what was happening in real time and make changes in real time. They will all say that, and it's things like headcount. How much headcount do I need to manage through this problem that we have? How much expedited freight am I spending on because I'm in this situation? Mm-hmm. How many service penalties am I getting because and there's a lot of overhead in managing that, and there's lots of operational cost, expedite freight cost. Yep. So what the platform enables them to do is to do this, to manage through the disruption with less people, but also to minimize things like expedite freight and to keep their operational costs down. So that helps them navigate through. And also it allows them to respond in a more agile way. So they see the data, they're able to respond very quickly to what's happening.
And, the customers of each part in this chain will get an answer sooner, not to wait for days or weeks to know what will happen, or waiting for delivery to arrive. We talked about planning, but also there's how to explain planning and execution. And how it works in this world.
Yeah. So this is where this becomes important for actionability. So when we talk about planning and execution, is two things. One is being able to run planning based on the latest execution data. So you're not forecasting a replenishment based on data that's 24 hours out of date. So that's one aspect to it. The other aspect to it is being able to use those planning algorithms in a predictive and prescriptive mode to create an actionable response. An actionable response is something that you can execute and it will meet the goal. So, example of that would be if I'm a manufacturer and I have placed orders on a contract manufacturer, and I know that I've got a production delay. How do I make the right decision? So do I expedite it? And if I expedite it, can it be executed? So can it actually get through customs? Can it get on a vessel? Can it get through the port on the other side? Can it be processed in my distribution center? Can it get to where it needs to be? Because quite often what happens is all this data that's coming in is the planners are having to make decisions without actually knowing what the outcome will be. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we mean by actionable response. So what the digital supply chain network does is that when it is solving an issue, it's looking at the end-to-end. So this is, again, where demand, supply, production, and logistics becomes really important. And it's looking at the end-to-end and figuring out, if I do this, I can actually execute it. And if I expedite my freight, it's not going to be a waste of money.
So in fashion, I know a fashion brand in the Netherlands, waiting for the goods, but they have to inform their customers, the retail stores, the boutiques, to receive their fashion for the fall. So basically, we used to live in a world with a lot of campaigns and this kind of stuff. But now, if you are not sure if your goods will arrive on time, these campaigns don't make sense at all. So yeah. I hope and I think and expect that supply chain people using a digital supply chain network are able to have a better conversation with marketeers and salespeople to say, does it make sense to do this campaign, or we should postpone it or change it anyhow?
Yeah, and that's where the integrated business planning comes into it as well. So the integrated business planning is part of the planning and execution because it sits on the execution data. So when you're doing that, simulating a launch of a product, you're doing that actually on execution data so that you can see that you will get the results that you want.
And how does it impact your business?
Yes. So this is also really important. So in any discussion that we have on control towers or digital supply chain networks is the value. Mm-hmm. And I think we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail later. So by having planning and execution, so what planning and execution does, so if you think about, I eliminate my system lead times, and then I have planning and execution working together to optimize my supply chain, whether that's solving problems or optimizing the network, the faster you do that, the better the outcome. So the companies that are able to respond more quickly. So I've got two companies, they've both got problems with supply, the same supply. The one that's able to respond more quickly, quite clearly, is going to win at the shelf. So they're the ones that are going to get the product on the shelf, sell it to the consumer, their revenue is going to go up. And then by working with the network, so if you're collaborating with your network with the goal of reducing operating cost or freight cost, then you're going to bring down cost of goods sold. So that's going to help with margins. And then also balancing your working capital. So if you can use things like what we call our multi-echelon inventory optimization, which is working on real-time data and using all that latest demand variability, supply variability, etc., is optimizing working capital. Now, I'm not saying reducing, because you might not want to reduce. Sometimes it might make sense to hold more, but optimizing working capital so it works for you. So these are the three kind of levers that we can drive a lot of value in through having the, planning with execution and eliminating the system lead times.
Maybe you can explain a bit more where the value is trapped in the whole supply chain.
Yeah. Okay. So this is one of my favorite topics at the moment, this one. So, and this goes back to the 30 years ago, how supply chains operated, and companies had never really got out of the silos, and they've never really got out of the silos, both in terms of how the supply chain is run, but the supply chain financials. So most companies will look at, how do I optimize my P&L? So how do I optimize my inventory? How do I optimize my cost of goods sold? How do I improve my revenue? And that often, especially cost of goods sold, gets passed upstream and then comes back as product price. So when everyone's optimizing in the silo, you're just really looking at your own profit and loss. And before COVID, this was probably okay. Since COVID, this has become, I think, a big challenge for a lot of companies. So inventory, what inventory do I hold where? Because I don't know what my consumers are doing anymore. It's online, it's in the store. I can't get inventory, so I'm holding on to it. So inventory is no longer optimized. My cost of goods sold is going up because I've got my freight cost has gone up. I've had to hire more people because I'm having so many supply issues. I'm expediting. So my cost of goods sold is going up, and it's going up for everybody. And my revenue is dropping because I can't get the product to the shelf, whether that's because there's no drivers, it's getting stuck in a ship out off the port, off the coast of California. So this is now happening across the board. And I think this has been a big shift in the last 18 months where companies are now really seeing the impact that supply chain has on the P&L.
Yeah, looking at the slide, and I love the slide for several reasons. Before COVID, already a lot of companies have a hard time getting an overview of the total landed cost of products.
Yeah.
And even the cost to serve on an SKU level or a product level, they don't get it, because they only get the cost from their tier one supplier, and that's it. And looking at this graph, you need to have an overview of the total landed cost in every node to make sure, what is the best way to get it to the customer. And then you get a whole notion and different discussion than we had before COVID. And I saw an overview of an item, a toys item in the US, and that went up from $80 to $120, and was, differentiated. You have transportation going up, taxes going up, but it's now from $80 to $120, and that's that will happen, and we see it right now with a lot of goods, not only consumer goods, but also in the B2B. And if you don't have an overview in this sense in every node, you won't get it. You won't get the right way to get it to your customer.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And okay, and so, how do you unlock it?
Right. So this is where the digital supply chain network comes in. So what the digital supply chain network does is break down those silos. So it's everyone's you join the network, the lead times disappear, the system lead times disappear. You have real-time visibility to what is going on. So you can start to then respond to those issues, those disruptions that are occurring, and that may result in a revenue increase. It may result in a cost of goods sold reduction because you're not expediting freight. It's definitely going to bring cost of goods sold down in terms of headcount that is required to resolve issues, and then using the optimizations to balance the inventory. But what ultimately will happen is that will work for everyone on the network. So just eliminating that bullwhip effect. And I think, Martijn, when you and I spoke before, you were talking about the professor, and I can't remember his name. Howley, yes. And he was saying his philosophy is that you will never get rid of the bullwhip effect as long as you have system lead times.
Yep.
So if you can get rid of those system lead times, you get rid of the bullwhip effect, you have visibility to what's going on, you're able to respond more quickly, then really the whole network wins. So everyone wins across that network. So, it can be an industry winning, it could even be an economy winning. I need to go and sell it to the UK government for all supply chains in the UK.
Interestingly enough, last year, Unilever, sounds a bit counterintuitive, but they paid their suppliers earlier. And not later. A lot of them, a lot of the competitors were paying the suppliers later. But Unilever said, no, we have to pay them earlier to make the supplies reliable. And also they pre-finance their commercial channels to make sure that the channels will still be open and around to sell the Unilever goods. And Unilever said, if we don't sustain the whole ecosystem, we will lose.
Exactly. And no part of this network is able to operate on its own.
No.
They need everyone else in that network to be able to function. And I think this is the thing that's becoming really, really clear to all these supply chains that were fairly stable in the past are really now suffering with that. And again, those who solve this problem quickest are the ones that are going to win, because they're the ones that are going to get the inventory and they're going to get their product to the shelf.
And look at the e-commerce world. We're creating click and collect from stores to pick it up. So inventory allocation will be becoming a strategic issue. Will you put it centrally in Europe and dispatch it to every country, or do you want to be close to the consumers, depending if they are buying online or pick it up at the retail store? So I think that inventory allocation across this whole network will be the most strategic part of supply chain, and whereas inventory management might be the lowest part and the more operational part, I think inventory allocation in the near future will be the most strategic part of supply chain management, even in business.
Yes, it's a good point. Yeah, actually, there's a question actually from Craig, and I apologize if he gets a name wrong, Makilargi. I apologize if I got surname wrong. And he actually raises a good point, which is the silo issue isn't just outside the enterprise. It can sometimes be inside the enterprise. So lots of companies have business units, and those business units have very different product lines, and those product lines will again have very different challenges, like automotive versus consumer goods. So yes, these silo issues can occur within an enterprise, and so the beauty of the digital supply chain network is it can solve all of those problems. So an enterprise that's got multiple business units can operate on the same network, and that network can be solving the different challenges for those business units.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Craig. I was watching the Q&A function, not so much the chat function. But another example, last year I know Henkel quite well, and Henkel have 3 different major divisions, and one of them is automotive, but they also producing adhesive for the do-it-yourself stores. So do-it-yourself was booming. Everybody was in home, improving their homes, On the other hand, the adhesives, because a lot of parts are being glued together in automotive, it went down. So you have to have an overview to manage the total supply chain of only this division. Otherwise, if if you don't know it as a whole and manage it as a whole, you don't know from each other how you can switch to the growing part of your business. So even in a Henkel version where you have different business units within a division, you have to have the overview overall, let alone over the three parts of the three divisions in your company. And as you see right now, inventory, in the old days, you had to lower your inventory, but nowadays, a lot of companies are happy that they have inventory at the right place. And,
exactly. It's about balancing it, knowing is that trade-off between revenue, inventory, cost. So what does my inventory need to be?
Yeah, and even better, if you extend this view, this graph, this ecosystem, you have to put a world map underneath it, because now we have some challenges getting your stuff from Far East to Europe or to the US. There are a lot of container ships waiting to be unloaded at Long Beach. So you have to have a global map underneath it, because is this a global ecosystem or is it a more regional one with Europe as a whole? And so even on that matter, we have to redesign and look at the map and map out these ecosystems on it.
Right. Yeah.
And that's a challenge, because people talk about reshoring and onshoring. So they have to have a regional map underneath it if it makes sense to look at that differently.
Yeah.
Do you have also this kind of conversation with with the companies in your network at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, this comes down, this is the network optimization piece. So where am I sourcing from? And, where do I manufacture my product? So that's the network optimization piece. So yes, I think companies are starting to definitely think about that. I think it's still a bit more reactive in that area. Like there seems to be a real focus on getting the visibility, and then that piece is coming along behind it on how can I use network optimization to look at where I'm manufacturing products.
And I think it's a bit too early now, because now we're still in a global storm, I would say, with the parts. Yeah. And we have to wait to this whole transportation shortages has been resolved to some extent. Yes. And it takes time to build up local facilities. I know that Intel is planning to build facilities in Europe to manufacture chips for one hand. So it will take time. What is the value potential to solve all this?
So this is the seven kind of tips that we have for deploying a digital supply chain network to make sure that you're maximizing value.
Yeah.
So obviously start with visibility. So we spoke about that earlier. So getting one version of the truth, but then that visibility is nothing without action. So actionability is really important. If you have all that great data, you want to be able to do something with it so that it benefits the business. So making sure that you can take action. Value. So link everything to value. It's one of my favorite questions when I'm in meetings at the moment is, what is the value that you're trying to drive? So if you're talking about visibility, I need visibility. What do you need it for? So what is the KPI that you're really struggling with, and how does that actually impact the business financially? And then what are the things that you can do to change the needle on that particular KPI or that financial metric? So I think looking at value is really important when you're talking about visibility. Forecast accuracy.
Before you move on, so in this area, this is the part where I say, do you really want OTIF? Because in some areas, it all depends. What is your company strategy? Is it operational excellence? Are you driving cost out? Is it product leadership like Apple? You want to have availability and getting your new stuff in stores when it's out, when it's new? Or is it customer intimacy? You will create a portfolio of options, and cost is not the main driver, because you want a total solution. So I also say, if they talk about OTIF, what is your business strategy? And if they don't know, OTIF is useless. So I think it's good that you address this value part and differentiate the different targets: cost, cash flow, agility, revenue, and maybe reliability in lead times. So that's a different notion of than just KPIs and OTIF.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. What is the value?
Yeah,
it's really important.
Sorry, you were saying about forecast accuracy. Please go on.
Yeah, no, this is what we've been saying this for years. Forecast accuracy is an oxymoron. You can never have an accurate forecast. The forecast, as soon as it's created, is going to be out of date. Obviously, forecasts are important because that's what sets the business. It's the business forecast, but trying to continually improve forecast accuracy is not going to solve the problems that are in supply chains today. What we prefer to talk about is orchestrated execution. So how do you make sure that you're executing your supply chain in the most efficient way to meet consumer demand, to maximize revenue, or whatever your company strategy is. But yes, forecast accuracy, it is really an oxymoron.
Yeah, and Mark Engel, Chief Supply Chain Officer of Unilever, said it in a webinar last year. So, in this day and age, in the turmoil, agility wins forecast every time. So agility is way more important than forecasting, especially in this turmoil phase we are in, and we're probably staying for a while. So
right, exactly, and that's kind of the next point on here, which is speed wins every time. So speed will win over forecast accuracy. So if you're able to respond more quickly to disruptions, you're going to beat your competitor who isn't responding quickly to them. And then the last point there, your supply chain is not distinct from others. So I think this is also something that we're seeing, is that everyone's impacted by the same things. Everyone's impacted by chip shortage, by logistics issues. No one really has the upper hand when it comes to the challenges that are facing supply chains. If there's a coffee bean for harvest failure, it affects everyone. So the supply chain is not distinct. And the more that everyone can work together, the better the supply chains are going to function, and that's ultimately better for everyone. It's better for the harvester, it's better for the logistics provider, for the producer, for the coffee shop, and for the consumer.
Yes, to some extent you're right, but what I see now, ecosystems are competing against each other. I had an interview with a VP supply chain of a flashlight manufacturer in Europe. And they are supplying the flashlights in the iPhones on one hand, but they are also supplying automotive part for all kind of lights within your car. And basically, what she said is because Apple was more reliable in sharing data about planning schedules upfront, months upfront, than automotive, working just in time, not to rely on are they going to produce and if and when and how. Now, they decided to deliver the flashlights to Apple and not to automotive because they are more reliable. So in the end, the more open, and Apple is very strict, but still they are sharing plans in advance. So the flashlight manufacturer were deciding to, supply Apple and also Sony and that area, high-tech area, and not so much automotive because they were unreliable at sharing data. So within the ecosystem, there's no distinction because they are heard in the same way. But in an adjacent ecosystem, it could be working a bit differently. And then, in automotive is in the end of the line getting the goods.
Yeah.
So
yes, definitely.
All right. So again, what are the 3 steps how to start? And then we get to the Q&A.
Yeah. So just this is what we talked about earlier. So to get here, because it seems like a huge undertaking, but you can go step by step. So building that foundation of visibility by joining the network. Then step 2 would be the planning and execution layer that goes on top of it. So build a structure of actionable and executable. So that's the planning and the execution. And then the top layer would be the network-based optimization. So how are you going to drive that optimization across the network to the benefit of you and your suppliers and even your customers?
All right, we have only 1 minute for Q&A, but don't worry, we have 30 minutes next in Airmeet in the lounge if you want to discuss with Shirell and myself about this topic. One question, So how does the OneNetwork system able to thread together a sub-tier supplier's issue with an OEM supply?
Okay, just because there is a shortage at a supplier, my orders may be fine and not get impacted. Yeah, so this is the multi-tier. I think that's what this question is. So I'm an OEM supplier, and then I have a supplier, and my supplier has a supplier, and it's that second supplier that has the issue. So how do I know if that's going to impact my orders or not? So this is where the real-time visibility. So and what you want to ultimately get to is where you're sharing demand in real time. So I share demand with my supplier. I do a demand translation to the next tier of supply. So they have a forecast, and then they respond back and say whether or not they can supply it. Then there's an allocation based on bill of materials at that layer, and it allocates it back to the OEM or even to a market, so that you know if somebody at tier 2 who I can't see is impacting my tier 1, what impact does that have on me in terms of my orders or the markets that I'm serving? So that's the vision of the real-time planning and execution with the elimination of the lead times.
So if several companies in this ecosystem are sharing their demand plans to their tier 1, tier 2, and so forth and on, then the tier 2 know if they are able to supply, and tier 1 can respond yes, and so forth. All right, yes. We're running out of time, and maybe there's some more questions. I see some more popping up. I would suggest right after this, when I wrap up this webinar, this interesting conversation, you can join Shirell and me in the lounge. So we will be seating at table 1. So please join us over there. If not, there are some more resources to go through. On the left, you see the IT super map. OneNetwork is in there next to another bunch of supply chain software vendors, also on real-time visibility, a separate group. But in the end, there's a lot of them over there. And next, there are interesting white papers on the website of OneNetwork, a lot of interesting publications on automotive, but also on logistic control tower. So there's a lot of content over there. So with that, I would like to thank you, Shirell, for joining me in this interesting webinar. Thank you. And next, I would like to thank the audience for participating, for listening. And if you want to join us in the lounge, I see you within a minute at the table. Shirell and I will be there. If not, maybe I hope to see you in the next webinar next Wednesday, and I will see you there. So thank you for now, and see you later next time, or see you in the lounge. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.